They say the Middle Ages were shrouded in fog. Not the soft fog that rolls gently across a green meadow at dawn, but a black, choking mist that seeped from the pores of stone walls. Beneath the city's cracked flagstones lies a prison whose name was never written in any official registry, yet whispered like a curse. Law Girl or the Maw. No one knew who built it, only that it had always been there, 16 winters old. Emmerich sat across from Gale, silent, watching the tremor in the boy's hands. "Do you know why you're here?" the Confessor asked. Gale, son of a tanner. Forcing the neck to remain stiff, punishing even the softest nod of sleep. The boy lasted 2 days without fainting. A confession born from exhaustion was not a confession at all. It was theater. And Emmerich, though brutal, despised performance. He needed something true, something pure. On the third night, his eyes rolled upward and he whispered a name, not his own. The boy was accused of heresy, of consorting with a woman who spoke in tongues, and of stealing a relic from the nearby abbey. The charges were vague, but the church was starving for a scapegoat. The bishop had ordered it done swiftly. The pear was a device of quiet horror, shaped like the fruit for which it was named, but forged of iron and hinged to bloom open like the petals of damnation. Not enough, he said softly. He was something colder. It did not bleed its victim. It shattered them. Something closer to a mirror. Inserted into the mouth of a blasphemer, it spread with the turn of a key. But Emmerich did nothing swiftly, as though the earth itself had exhaled a cavity for suffering. It was said that when a man screamed within those walls, his voice would never echo. The stone had heard too much, not from pain, but from the terror of knowing. And still, Emmerich did not smile. But Emmerich did not use it that night. No, he only showed it. Was that he too had once been the boy on the other side of the table, that he had once confessed under the weight of the iron chair, that he had once been broken open like a fruit and left to rot, only to be reassembled into this, a vessel of method, of procedure. For sometimes the shadow of pain burns deeper than its flame, and refuse to listen any more. From the cracks and dungeons beneath cathedrals, but sinking into the skin with the weight of the victim's own panic. Of the Judas cradle upon which one was impaled slowly by the gravity of guilt. Of the Spanish tickler, which did not tickle at all, but flayed. But in memory, for the work he did could not be written without damning the page. He never raised his voice. He did not curse. He did not laugh. And yet, Emmerich was the most feared man in Toulouse, for he had perfected the art of listening, and the art of making others speak. He had once been a scribe, a monk, even a healer, but war had stripped him of titles, and the Inquisition had given him a new one, Confessor. His duty was not to soothe sin, but to drag it screaming into the light, no matter what limbs or sanity were left behind in the darkness, from the mouths of men sworn to God, yet loyal only to their cruelty. This is not a story of gallant knights or fair maidens in towers. This, dear listener, is a descent into the world of pain sculpted by human hands. Sharpened by faith, by fear, by power unrestrained. The year is 1247. And the sky above Toulouse is the color of rusted iron. Within those walls, man called Emmerich de Cressac kept his records. Not in ink, his eyes were pale, almost gray, like smoke trapped behind glass. They brought him a boy that autumn. First came the questioning. To repent, Gale whispered. No, Emmerich replied. You are here to remember. And so, memory was coaxed from muscle, from bone. The first night, Emmerich brought the heretic's fork, 2 metal prongs fastened at the throat and chest. It was enough. But Emmerich was not satisfied. So he summoned the pair of anguish. Forged in secret by blacksmiths who claimed divine visions. As Emmerich held the object before the candlelight, Gale turned his face away. Instead, he spoke of history. Of the iron chair, studded with spikes so fine they pierced not through. As he spoke, Gale wept. He was not a sadist. For what Gale could not know, and what Emmerich would never tell. When Gale finally confessed on the 7th day, trembling, incoherent, barely able to speak, Emmerich only nodded. Because the truth, dear listener, was that Emmerich no longer sought confession. He sought the point at which a soul becomes ash, and the fire, as we shall see, was only just beginning. The boy did not scream any more. By the 8th night, the silence in the chamber was no longer mercy. It was morning. Gale sat slumped against the wall, his wrists bruised from bindings, lips split and trembling not from pain, but from the hollowness that came after it. The air in the girl had thickened, not with smoke, but with history. Each stone seemed to hum with the breath of those who had been undone here. Yet Emmerich did not flinch. He was not haunted. Instead, he turned to the candlelit alcove and retrieved a black-bound ledger, not of names, but of blueprints, drawings, diagrams, instruments of divine engineering, each more vicious than the last. And beside each one, an annotation, always the same hand, always the same signature. He was part of the haunting, not the clatter of armor, not the shuffle of monks, but a voice, ragged, familiar. In that quiet, even the rats refused to scurry. They watched. With care more precise than compassion, Emmerich peeled it open, revealing a grotesque, glistening tool. The scavenger's daughter. They waited. Emmerich, unmoved, stood with hands folded behind his back, lifted the scavenger's daughter, set it beside Gale. He turned toward the fire pit in the center of the chamber, a relic from a time when this room had been used, not for punishment, but for purification. Or so the abbots once claimed. For in the margins of Pontius's last designs there had been a phrase, scribbled again and again between the ink lines, designed by a Tudor executioner with a scholar's eye for anatomy. It folded the human form against itself, compacting limbs, cracking ribs. It wasn't in words. It felt like it opened something in me. The architect of suffering who had trained him. No guards, no priests. Only the boy, the tools, and the questions that clawed through time. A man long thought dead, his body never found, his name erased from church records, his methods deemed too thorough, too effective. Even the Inquisition had boundaries. But Emmerich remembered. A figure curled into itself, its vertebrae forming a spiral. A sketch of something that had never been built, but long theorized. He had been 15. The same age Gale was now, but to contort it in such a way that the lungs would sing through pressure, through exhalation. A torture not for pain, but for revelation, forcing the victim to kneel beneath their own collapse. But fire, like faith, has no allegiance. It only consumes. And tonight, it would consume truth. On the iron rack beside him lay a new artifact, wrapped in burlap, still damp from river water and ash. And for the first time in years, Emmerich felt the old tremor in his knees. Not from fear, from recognition. Unlike the rack, which tore the body outward, the scavenger's daughter crushed inward. But pain was only the symptom. The disease was deeper, an invitation. Emmerich did not touch it yet. Let the flesh reveal the spirit. MP, that name had not been spoken aloud in 20 years. And yet Emmerich's fingers trembled when he saw it. The initials belonged to Master Pontius. It was in that moment, as the boy moaned behind him, that a sound rose from the corridor beyond the door. "You're using it wrong." Emmerich froze. He turned, but there was nothing. Only shadows and the dripping groan of the ceiling. But the voice had not come from memory. It had not whispered from his skull like an old dream. It had come from outside. He gathered himself. "Tell me again," he said, voice low. "Did the woman speak in tongues?" The boy whimpered. She sang. Emmerich's eyes narrowed. Sang what? I don't know, Gale croaked. The Confessor's jaw tensed. She sings behind the wall. This was no longer interrogation. This was recursion. That night, Emmerich sealed the chamber from within. He lit no candles. He sat across from Gale and unrolled a final diagram. One not of metal, but of bone. The Harrowing Wheel, a device meant not to mutilate the body. It doesn't exist, Gale murmured, his voice trembling at the edge of delirium. But you've seen it, Emmerich replied, voice void of doubt. How? Because you were meant to. Because I was meant to. In the fire's glow, something shimmered. Not heat, but memory made flesh. He had been chasing pain. The woman Gale spoke of, she was not a heretic. She was a herald. Emmerich? Was her echo. There is a moment, thin as a blade's whisper, when pain ceases to be a punishment and becomes a portal. Emmerich had seen it before, in the eyes of witches, as they burned, in the mouths of zealots who thanked him as their bones shattered. But tonight, for the first time, he stepped through that portal himself. Gale had not slept. His body trembled, but not from the cold. His lips moved constantly, whispering something Emmerich could not yet decipher. It wasn't Latin, nor Occitan, nor any tongue spoken in the courts of men. But it was familiar. Terribly familiar. The boy's skin had taken on a pallor like wax, almost luminous in the half-light. And still, he whispered, like a lullaby hummed in a dream one cannot recall upon waking. The spiral of the Harrowing Wheel, etched in coal and ash. The symbol had followed him. Across decades, across faith, across flesh. Now it burned not on parchment, but behind his eyes. The scavenger's daughter had not broken him, nor had the pair, but something else was breaking. A passage sealed behind stone, not to keep people out, but to keep something in, and not in Gale, in Emmerich. He had said those same words once, not as Confessor, but as the Confessed. 15 years old, beneath the cloisters of Albi, strapped to a table designed by Master Pontius himself. He had spoken the name of the woman in the wall, and for that he had been spared and damned. He stared into the dying fire and saw not flame, but pattern. Torch in hand, he passed alcoves filled not with bones, but with tools. Not rusted, not rotting. Preserved as if they had never truly been used, but always waiting. He turned to Gale. The boy stirred in his arms. She waits beneath the stone. She waits behind the wall. Emmerich staggered backward. His own voice, so long silent in his own memories, rose unbidden in his throat. He tore the ledger open. The air shimmered. Warm, wet, thick, with the copper scent of old blood and forgotten incense. And at the center of it all, upon a dais of polished black stone, stood a device unlike any he had seen. In its final pages, hidden between the folds of diagrams and torture mechanisms, was a map. Not of a city, not of geography, but of depth. Now singing. The same formless melody, but louder, fuller, echoing off the living walls. A descent. It showed a spiral staircase beneath La Girl, one that no guard knew, no bishop remembered. Emmerich had once thought himself a man of purpose, scribed with runes that pulsed like veins. At its center, a hollow socket shaped not for a limb, but for a voice. A hand of the divine, shaping truth through torment. But the map proved otherwise. He was not the architect. He was the key. He carried Gale. Not with kindness, not with cruelty, but with inevitability. Pain was the signal. The soul, the conductor. Through a passage veiled in centuries of dust and silence, he descended. At the base of the stair, a door of stone, unmarked but humming with a sound that was not quite music, not quite breath. She's close now. Emmerich did not ask who. He knew. Every secret he had forced from broken mouths had been in service of this moment. With a strength born not of muscle but of surrender, he pushed the door open. The chamber beyond was not of human design. The walls curved as though grown. not built. The Harrowing Wheel, real. Not a blueprint, not a theory, but real. Forged not by man, or perhaps by men who had long ceased being men. The wheel was ringed in bronze veins. Emmerich felt the pull. He set Gale down. The boy stood on trembling legs, no longer whispering, and the walls sang back. It was then Emmerich understood the devices they had used for centuries. The chair, the rack, the fork were not mere instruments of confession. They were antennas, receivers of a frequency that flesh alone could not interpret, and the wheel was the amplifier. Emmerich wept, not from fear, not even from shame. Everything he had done, every scream he had carved. He was no longer the confessor. He was the chorister, and the song was only just beginning. The wheel turned, slowly at first, like the shifting of a mountain, like a breath held for centuries and finally exhaled. Its bronze frame pulsed with a crimson glow, not cast from fire, but from within. Gale stepped forward, no longer trembling. The boy who had once wept beneath the pear, who had cowered before the scavenger's daughter, now moved with the certainty of prophecy. His feet bled across the stone, but he did not notice. Or perhaps he no longer felt. Emmerich watched, paralyzed, not by chains, but by realization. He had not broken Gale, staring into the eyes of a mother as she begged him to stop turning the vice on her son's ankles. He had awakened him. Every scream, every confession, every carefully measured moment of pain had not drawn sin from flesh. The very walls seemed to breathe. Veins bulged in the stone. Shadows swayed to music no ear could trace, but every bone could feel. It had carved open the shell of mortality and let something else look through. And now, before the harrowing wheel, that something smiled through Gale's eyes. The chamber, once still, began to vibrate, not violently, but with rhythm, like the first notes of a hymn rising from unseen throats. Emmerich took one step forward, just one, not like a victim, not even like a priest, and in that step, time unspooled. He was 15 again, bound in iron beneath Pontius's hand. He was 20. Every click of the cradle as it lowered sinners into impalement. He had made those sounds, and the wheel remembered. He was 35, watching a man's jaw break under the pressure of the fork, and feeling nothing. But now he felt everything. But as a chorus, each pitch perfect, each echoing with the truth that had been torn from them. The walls bled, and Gale, no longer a boy, no longer anything human, opened his mouth, and it burned. Gale climbed the dais. Her skin was not flesh, but the shimmer of hot iron under moonlight. And her voice, when it came, was not heard, but inhaled. It filled Emmerich's lungs, his veins, his soul. But like a conductor returning to the podium, he placed his hands upon the wheel, and it began to sing. Not in words, not in melody, but in memory. Pain was never the punishment, it was the prayer. The cries of 1,000 tortured souls roared through the chamber, not as screams. Confessions were not forgotten, they were stored. And now they were being played back. Emmerich fell to his knees, not in reverence. And Emmerich de Cressac's name was struck from every record, not by order, but by consensus, as if the world itself wished to forget. In judgment, for every sound that echoed from the wheel bore his mark. Every twist of pliers, every iron bite of the chair, it turned again. Faster now, the dais cracked. And the woman stepped through. She did not walk. She unfolded, from sound, from shadow, from silence. Her eyes were hollow, not empty, but limitless, like the black between stars. "You did well, little key." He tried to speak, but the words curled back inside him like smoke denied exit. She stepped down from the dais and reached out a hand, not to Gale, who had vanished into her song, but to Emmerich. And with a touch softer than breath, she raised him to his feet. "Now you understand," she whispered. He wept, not for himself, but for the world above. Because now he saw what lay beneath the centuries of cruelty and doctrine. Not evil, not madness, but ritual, and the ritual was complete. When the chamber collapsed, no one above heard it. The girl was sealed again by dust, by time, by shame. The prison eventually crumbled into legend. The church denied it had ever existed. But some nights, especially when the moon hangs low and rust-colored above old cities, a sound can be heard beneath the stones. Not a scream, but the low, measured turning of a wheel. And if one listens closely, very closely, they may hear a voice beneath it, a voice that does not confess, but calls.